Alright, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first living environment online lesson. I'm going to let you know that I am operating with a couple of seconds of a delay between anything that gets put into the chat and anything that I get to see. So if you post something in the chat, I won't actually respond to it for about 10 seconds because I won't see it. We're going to start our new unit today. We're going to start looking at ecology, which is the interactions between the environment and the plants and animals and other organisms that live there, and the interactions that those animals have with each other, the interactions that the animals have with the environment, the interaction that the environment has with the animals, and all of that interconnectivity. We're going to start off with some definitions. Right, again, looking at ecology and the idea of how these different things are all going to interact with each other. We're going to look at how organisms interact with other organisms and the non-living things around them, which is going to be things we're going to define in a little bit, called biotic factors and abiotic factors. Again, and we see here, for example, a fish in a pond eats worms, it takes in oxygen, so it's interacting with other animals in the environment, it's interacting with the environment itself. Right. We're going to use environment and ecosystem, we're going to use community and population, we're going to use a bunch of different words to define the scale at which we are going to view these things, and define those as we go. Right. Alright, so when we talk about the environment, we're talking about everything that surrounds an organism, so that's all of the plants and animals and non-living things, right? So that's the dirt, the air, the water, in addition to the plants, the other animals, all of that, right? All of those things are environment. If we're looking at, say, a forest, right, we have not only the trees, right, we have the amount of sunlight as a factor that matters here. We have the grass, the height of the grass, the type of grass, whether or not there are, plants that are lower to the ground, right, like small bushes, versus flowers and how those flowers are going to attract insects, right? All of these things together are going to be part of the environment. That was a very bad bracket. I'm going to try that again. Right? All of these things together are going to be the environment. Right? If that includes a body of water, or if that doesn't include a body of water, that's fine, right? But all of these things, living and non-living, are going to be part of the environment. If we take a second and look at bigger, broader interactions, we have an ecosystem. Right? An ecosystem, an area where the living things interact with each other and non-living things, right? So the environment is just the statement of those things, right? What are the things in your environment? Versus the ecosystem, and we're not going to look at it as a static, non-changing thing. An ecosystem is a changing thing. We're looking at the interactions that things have with each other. Right? And we're going to look at all of these interactions like we see on my slide here, right? all of the air that gets breathed, the water that gets drank, the oxygen that gets made, the oxygen that gets taken in, the animals eating other animals, animals eating plants. All of those things are interactions that we're going to see as we move on further in the unit into things like food webs and food chains. And we look at the effect that changing one of these factors will have on the other members of the ecosystem. Pausing here just to see if there's any questions. Okay, moving on. When we talk about an ecosystem, we also look at the climate of that ecosystem, right? The amount of rainfall, the amount of sunlight, the length of the seasons. All of these things are going to influence what type of ecosystem is going to develop there, right? If we have somewhere without a lot of rain, with a lot of harsh sunlight, that area will most likely develop into a desert over time. And we'll see adaptations in organisms that lead to better survival in these ecosystems, right? We'll see organisms that survive on very little water, plants that can be blown around by the wind to get to wherever they need to go instead of trying to have insects pollinate them. And as we look at other things, we want to define them, we want to put them into two categories. We're going to put them into biotic factors and abiotic factors. Abiotic are non-living things, right? So that's our water, our oxygen, our sunlight, our temperature, our presence of minerals. This is where our climate is going to take a role as well. Biotic factors are going to be our other living things, which we are going to further categorize, as you have probably seen in the past with other food chains and food webs and other activities of that same style. We're going to have producers, herbivores, carnivores, or decomposers, and we're going to look at the organisms that play the role of each of these things and how competition or lack of competition really affects the survivability of these organisms. If we look at producers, herbivores, or if we take these and we want to define them, a lot of these words should be familiar to you. A producer, an organism that makes their own food. This is plants. This is certain single-celled organisms that are going to, make their own food. They're really going to be the base of our food chains and our food webs. And herbivores, we're going to move up this ladder. Herbivores are going to eat the plants. They're going to eat I don't know why I was going to say eat the plants twice, but I was going to say eat the plants twice. Organisms that are going to eat the plants and then gather that energy for themselves are going to be the base of things like carnivores, lions, tigers, bears, all these other meat-eating things. And then decomposers at the other end of the spectrum are the things that are going to rely on the waste and the dead organisms themselves. A wolf that hunts a deer is going to eat a lot of the deer but not the whole thing, right? That's when we're going to have scavengers come in. That's where we're going to have decomposers come in. to help break down the leftover bits and kind of recycle them back into the ecosystem, to make sure that our nutrients and our minerals and our resources are kind of cyclical. There's a missing piece here: herbivore, carnivore. There's also an omnivore, which is an organism that eats plants and animals. Or plants and animals. I should really say plants and other organisms. And I should really write better, jeez. They're not going to come up as a huge part of our classification of things. We really, when we have a food web or a food chain, we like to focus on either an herbivore or a carnivore and try to simplify things. We are omnivores, right? Humans are omnivores. There's a lot of things that fit into that classification. Humans get put into this category 100%, right? Humans, alongside humans and any other things that eat both. Like I said before, we're going to look at these things at varying scales. We're going to look at just one type of organism. We're going to zoom out and look at all of the different organisms that live in a certain area. We're going to zoom out and look at the entire ecosystem. And we need the right vocab to really focus on each of these things. The vocab terms that we're going to look at here: population, community, and ecosystem. Population are focused on just one type of organism. So you see in the examples, all of the deer in the forest, that's the population of deer. All of the salmon in the lake, that's the population of the salmon. All of the cacti in the desert, that's all of the cacti. And we're not focusing on, right, in the forest there's also monkeys, in the forest there's also birds, in the forest there's also trees. But as we look at population, we're focusing on one organism and we're tracking the growth of that organism. When we zoom out and we look at community, then we look at everything that is living, right? So all of the biotic things in an ecosystem. So, for example, I took the salmon in the lake, right? We're not looking at just the salmon, now we're looking at the frogs and the geese and the other little fish and the plankton and the algae and the rest. When we zoom out to the furthest level and we look at an ecosystem, we're looking at the same factors we're looking at before, all of the living things, but when we zoom out for ecosystem, we're starting to now include all of the abiotic factors as well. We're looking at the amount of water, the saltiness, right? The saltiness of the water. We're looking at how much oxygen there is. We're looking at how much sunlight there is. We're looking at the temperature. We're expanding to try to include as many factors as we possibly can into our ecosystem and our analysis of that ecosystem. Actually, pause. Is that really all I had for today? I'll go a little bit further today. When we talk about a stable ecosystem, we want an ecosystem that can be self-sufficient, that can feed on itself, that can kind of keep itself going without the need for outside influence. So when we look at a stable ecosystem, we want one that has a constant supply of energy. Like we talked about earlier in the year in our nutrition unit, all of the energy that you get comes from the sun. Right? The sun fuels the growth of the plants. The plants fuel the growth of the herbivores fuel the growth of the carnivores and the omnivores, right? Because all of this energy gets based out of plants. We also need decomposers and things to break down the dead animals back into soil, right? To remake the soil from what the plants have taken from it in order to grow. So that's the trees that have fallen over and started to rot. Those are going to become soil eventually. The bones and remains of animals, that will become soil again eventually. And we need the decomposers to really break those things down so that there's enough soil for more trees to grow, for more plants to grow, for then animals to eat those plants and us to have our cycle over and over and over again. Right? Very much a circle of life. We can have this on our own, right? We can keep an aquarium stable. Can't hear anything. Am I too quiet? Let me move a little closer then. Can't hear anything. How about now? Okay. If we want to work on a model ecosystem, sorry, I can talk louder. That's definitely a me thing that I can change. If we're looking at keeping an ecosystem stable, we can talk about a model ecosystem. An aquarium is a great model ecosystem. You put water in there, you put fish in there, you take care of the abiotic factors, you make sure that there's enough sunlight, you make sure that there's enough water, you make sure that the temperature is correct. And then you use plants and other things to help balance out the oxygen. Right? If the plants don't make enough oxygen, the fish die. If the plants don't make enough carbon dioxide, the plants die. Really, there's a balance going on between the different parts of the ecosystem. When more fish are born, they're going to make more and more carbon dioxide. They're going to require more and more oxygen from the plants. And either the plants will be able to keep up, or the plants won't be able to keep up, and then they're going to have to lose some fish in order to balance ourselves out. The opposite is true when fish die. Right? If we have 10 fish, and that's perfectly balancing out the plants that are living, if all of a sudden we have 5 fish and some of those fish are dead, they're not making as much carbon dioxide. And because they're not making enough carbon dioxide, then the plants can't survive, because they can't take their carbon dioxide to then photosynthesize and make their energy. Right? We need that balance, right? This is a pretty simple example of just fish and plants in an ecosystem. We need that balance to exist. Otherwise, it'll just skew towards one thing and the whole ecosystem will collapse. Right? If all of the fish die, that means there's nothing making. If all of the fish die, then there's nothing to make carbon dioxide for the plants to use. Right? So the ecosystem is the entire thing, right? That's the plants, the animals, the air, the water, the sunlight, everything that you can possibly think of that interacts with something else is going to make up the ecosystem. If we talk about just the population, right? If we go back a slide here, right? If we talk about just the population, we're looking at just one type of organism. So if we're looking at the population in our aquarium example, we're looking at just the fish or just the plants. If we look at the community, right, it's the in-between. It's the step in between. We're looking at the plants and the fish. And then ecosystem is going to be the whole thing. Right, let me see if I can make notes of that somewhere. All right, so we have ecosystem. Right, our populations. Our population and our community, right, is going to be, like I said here, right, our population is going to be all of the things in one species. So our population is going to be fish. We're going to have a population of plants, right, not both, but one or the other. I know my handwriting isn't great on this. I'm still trying to learn how to write on this drawing pad. And our community is going to be all living things. Right, so it kind of gets a little broader as we go up. Right, our population being just the fish or just the plants. Community being the fish and the plants. Our ecosystem being the fish and the plants and the water and the temperature and the sunlight. Right, so if you have a terrarium, if you have an aquarium, you are working on doing your best to keep the ecosystem stable, to make sure that there's enough food for the fish, to make sure that there's enough carbon dioxide for the plants, to make sure that either you have a something to oxygenate the water, right? You have one of those little bubblers in there to make sure that air gets diffused into the water so that the fish can breathe, or you have plants that are going to make oxygen for the fish to take in. You're making sure that it's in a spot with enough sunlight. You're making sure that it's not too hot or not too cold. Right? You're working on keeping that ecosystem stable. Right? In the real world, right, outside of us doing our own keeping of things stable, we have. Well, pause 1 second. All of this is stuff that I just said. Plants in the water, right? Things like seaweed or algae or kelp. All of those things are existent in the water. Right, so if we want to really focus in on this, we have the sun giving energy to plants, the plants taking the energy and making glucose, the plants getting nutrients from the water around them, fish eating the plants and using the glucose to get energy to survive, the fish and the plants exchanging their gases, fish breathing in the oxygen, breathing out the carbon dioxide, the plants taking in, that should be a small 2. But the plants taking in the carbon dioxide and giving off the oxygen, right? This constant exchange, like we have with plants, not underwater. Basically, all the nutrients in the water are there for the plants. So everything that they need to survive. So whether that's some extra minerals or not really vitamins, but everything that a land plant would get from the soil, water plants have either adapted to not need or get it from absorbing it from the water itself. And so if we think back to excretory system a little bit, Everything that a person takes in that they have extra of, they pee away. Fish pee, right? So every extra nutrient, every extra mineral that a fish takes in, they're going to pee out, right? They're going to excrete somehow. And the plants are going to take in the nutrients that they need from the extra that the fish has in order to pull it in for itself. Right? And some of those nutrients in the water are going to come from when the fish die, right? So the decomposers are going to break down the bodies, release those nutrients back into the ecosystem, then the plants can take them back in. Does the sun provide nutrients? The sun is providing energy, but not nutrients, right? Nutrients are physical things. Nutrients are physical things. So in order for the sun to be giving nutrients, it would need to act like physically interact, right? The plants don't touch the sun, so they can't actually take nutrients from the sun. But they can interact with the water, right? Energy can travel distances, but nutrients can't. Right? You might be thinking of how we need the sun for vitamin D, but that's more a reaction that happens in our bodies rather than the sun giving us that vitamin. Right? Like being outside in the sun triggers our body to make vitamin D. And then, as we go forward, we're going to talk a little bit about limiting factors and how certain things can impact a population of organisms, right? If there's only enough food for 100 deer to live, then if you have 110 deer, some of them are going to die out, right? It can grow up to a point, and it's called a carrying capacity, which is something we're going to look at tomorrow. Right? If there are predators present, we're going to have that interaction between predator and prey. There might be a huge lag spike. I'm still working on trying to make this as balanced out as I can. So don't worry too much if you have any lag. Yeah, so there are limiting factors in every ecosystem that are going to put a cap on how many of each type of organism should be able to live there. When we look at food webs and food chains, we're going to see how those interactions affect each other. Right? If there's too many predators, then they're going to hunt all of the prey, and we're going to look at all of that in more detail as we move forward. I am going to stop us here, and we will pick up with more of this tomorrow. I'm going to stop at this stream and start up a second stream in 3 minutes, 2 minutes. That will serve as office hours and tutoring. So if you have any questions or want me to talk through anything else, just hang here, refresh the page or something in 2 minutes, and there should be a new live stream up. I'm going to make the announcement one more time that, again, you don't need to make any of these. You don't have to be here live. These are going to get posted to the YouTube channel that you're on right now, and you can watch them delayed. So if you have, another class that's meeting at this time or any other important thing to do, or if you miss a day or you forget, that's totally fine as long as you get to the video sometime before the homeworks are due on Sunday nights. And I will see some of you in 5 minutes. I will see some of you tomorrow. Have a great day.